Hi, my name is David Winsberg. The title of today's video is How to Boil the Oceans. Um, about 11 months ago, I appeared on Donny Budinsky's Standing for Truth channel, and I had a 4-hour live stream event where I discussed um, some things regarding to the heat that would be released during the Genesis flood and how to deal with it. The next day after the video was over with, I went through and rewatched the entire 4-hour live stream. However, when I reviewed the live stream the next morning, it became very apparent to me that, let's just say, some people did not understand what I was trying to say in my presentation. Again, this happened 11 months ago. Now, during the live stream, I did not look at the live chat comments because I felt that would distract me from the presentation I was giving and to also distract me from answering the questions. I figured if people had asked questions in the live chat, then the host, which was Donny Budinsky, would present them to me and then I could ask questions, which he did during the live stream. And so the proper response, I felt, was to do a follow-up presentation addressing all the questions and concerns that people had during the presentation that had been expressed through the live chat. And so I contacted Donny Budinsky the next morning, and I told him that I sent him an email and said that I would like to do a follow-up presentation. He agreed to that, and that never happened. So what actually happened after January 11th is um, two YouTubers actually decided to post responses to mine. The first response was posted on February 7th by the channel Gutsick Gibbon, titled "These Creationists Failed to Solve the Heat Problem Again, Shocking." Then on May 28th, the YouTube channel Mr. Anderson posted a video titled "The Heat Problem, a Debate Analysis." Oops. And then there was a completely unrelated live stream event by Standing for Truth on August 12th of this year with Dr. Jason Lyle, in which he briefly asked a question regarding this. To that, there was a response by Gutsick Gibbon's channel on September 1st titled "The Death of Scientific Creationism. Rest in Peace, Scientific Creationism Murdered by the Heat Problem," to which there have been now 3 responses from Kent Hovind and Standing for Truth to the September 1 video posted by Gutsick Gibbon. The reason there hasn't been a response is because I had told Donny Budinsky that I would provide him a pre-recorded response, and I simply haven't done that yet.
Unfortunately, this delay on my part has led to several comments from those in the evolutionist camp, such as these 2 exchanges that were made, one recently and the other back in June.
Case in the C14 and dinosaur fossils, evolutionists like Gutsick Gibbon, they like to say this data point precludes creation, right? You'll see she has videos, limestone precludes creation, heat problem precludes creation. We've addressed all those. In reality, C14.
How about the heat problem, Donny? You addressed that one? Oh, 5 times and counting?
They haven't answered it, but they've addressed it and acknowledged it as an unsolved problem.
They've acknowledged it's a problem. They've given a solution that doesn't actually work, and then they go to other solutions that don't work. And when those are pointed out to not work, they return back to a previous solution that does work. And it's
Do you remember when SFT had Sam from Redefined Living on to answer the heat problem, and then his answer ended up being, well, elsewhere in the Bible, we see God miraculously disappear heat. So, therefore, God just miracled away all the heat. Problem solved. It's been addressed.
Did you see McQueen and the toilet roll?
Oh, yeah. That was
I remember
hilarious.
Hilarious.
I haven't seen the toilet bowl with McQueen, but
yeah, it's like the toilet bowl tube or whatever it was, some bizarre little thing.
Oh no!
It was
Yeah.
a corridor or something that was taking the heat out to space, and he had like a toilet inside of a toilet roll trying to,
Yeah,
explain
it's,
it. It
he-
was something.
The
He
heat
had
problem
some-
is like absolutely devastating. Like if there's any one thing that keeps these people up at night and gives them nightmares, it's the heat problem.
Oh yeah.
Well, you may be surprised to see me include a clip from another video in my response here. If so, you're not the only person to be surprised.
What is it about Origin of Life? Maybe you could tell us.
Some amino acids can be found naturally in meteorites. I almost shot out of my seat. That was the weirdest thing to hear a clip from a video from about 4 years ago of me talking about abiogenesis to a bunch of creationists in a casual context, and to see it alongside of a Twitter post from when I went to the AMNH. Okay, so foreshadowing over, surprise, James Tour has his editor scrape the internet for, I guess, every time that I've ever talked about abiogenesis, the overwhelming majority of which was from 4+ years ago, like right at the beginning when I started here on YouTube. And then he responds to those arguments, sometimes with papers that weren't out when I was saying those things 4 years ago. In a weird way, this makes sense because I don't think James Tour's editor likes me very much because I criticized their use of spooky black and white trailers before videos, and they put that in this video's like precursor trailer.
All right, what I'm going to ask you to do is to sit down somewhere safe, and then pause this video so you can swallow whatever you're eating or drinking before you hear what I'm about to say next. Okay, this video you're watching does not just include a clip from one other video. It includes clips from 72, yes, 72 other videos. And most of these are from this woman's channel, or other channels that she appeared on. And it's not because I don't like her. Actually, this woman has said, she's actually said some positive things about me in her videos. It's because I don't like some of the things she has said, specifically because they're wrong. There is a difference between not liking somebody and just not liking what they say.
Listen to what the critics had to say in June.
Stealth Gun 5 for 10 pounds. Erica, huge fan, but has any young Earth creationist ever solved the heat problem yet? And hope this helps towards the Dino Find funds. No creationist has solved the heat problem yet. And to make matters worse, well, or better, depending on how you look at it, they've stopped trying, at least in the YouTube arena. I haven't seen a video out of Donny Deals and Company or any others about the heat problem in quite some time, because I think they finally, fingers crossed, pulled towards the it's going to end up being miraculous. And at that point, where does it stop is my question.
No, see Erica, what happened is, remember how Donny does all those streams about like the heat problem absolutely demolished, there's no recovery for this? It was just true the last time, and there you go, now they've solved it, we're done now.
It's so true. So yeah, exactly. And like my 4-hour compilation response was just like, he was just like, I ain't reading all that.
So the answer to this question, why hasn't there been any response in the YouTube arena, is for two principal reasons. The first reason is that none of the critics ever responded to my main point. So there was no need to respond to the critics who say that they've provided a response, because they didn't. I will explain more later in this video. The second reason is I personally had promised Donny that I would provide him a response. I have not done that yet. And so the reason for why there hasn't been a response is primarily because I had a lot going on and I didn't get him a response in a timely fashion. So in response to this question is, why hasn't there been any response to it? Frankly, it's my fault. When I reviewed the comments and also reviewed the original response back in February 7th, that response video, I decided to make a full presentation that would address all the questions that had been asked during my presentation on January 11th. And I was also going to respond to the February 7th video, which had many inaccuracies, and I felt that my point hadn't got across. Problem is when I started looking into and preparing for my response, there was a lot more involved than I thought, and so it's taken a while.
I am not the only person who's taken their sweet little time to create a YouTube video that could or should have been done sooner. Let's listen to one YouTuber's opinion on this topic, specifically the topic of being too busy to make videos in a timely fashion.
I'm super busy right now in real life and also with relation to this channel. I'm working on several very large projects. I'm chugging away at my dissertation, and I am fighting the existential dread of future changes that may impact me through the university and academic system in this country, the United States. But of course, in between working on my dissertation and scripting and filming and editing for major projects and videos with regard to YouTube and screaming in the woods about the state of things, I gotta feed the algorithm or this thing forgets about me. And I simply can't have that. I love attention too much. Now, there are a lot of topics that I want to cover, and I do not have time to do each one of these studies justice. So I'm not going to try to do them justice. Instead, I'm going to briefly summarize them for you, and I'm going to talk about how it fits within the context of what we already know and where we can go from here. What I'm not going to do is do a several-hour deep dive into proteomics so that I can explain to you the minor quibbles that I might have with my limited understanding that I only recently acquired with the methodology on a proteomics paper, because I don't have time to do that as much as I would love to. I am easily stymied and stunlocked, I guess is the contemporary word for it, when I am faced with a big to-do list, all of the things upon which I want to do justice, I want to do well and explain them accurately. So this is a challenge for me to go through several papers and to do so in brief.
Now, while there is a lot that this particular YouTuber says that I strongly disagree with, on this issue I do agree with her. Sometimes a video is not ready yet, simply because said YouTuber is too busy to get a video out as quickly as they should have. But before I begin, I would like to address some mistakes I made in my January 11th presentation. We're going to start with this slide that I'm going to show on screen here. On the left side is the slide that I showed on January 11th. On the right side is what I should have showed on January 11th.
But before I talk about what is the title of today's video, which was How to Boil the Oceans, let's talk about some of the individuals who have posted video responses to my January 11th presentation, and let's hear a little bit about them. The first respondent was a guy by the name of Mr. Anderson. This is how Mr. Anderson introduces himself at the start of every one of his videos.
Hi, my name is Mr. Anderson, and I am mean to people on the internet. I'm always polite about it, though. I just tend to ask difficult questions and insist on the answers. It shouldn't be a big surprise because I'm a lawyer. On my channel, you'll find a lot of stuff to do with debate. You can think of my channel as kind of like a self-defense course for getting into fights on the internet.
Okay, so Mr. Anderson is, number one, is a lawyer, and number two, he's mean to people on the internet. Unlike another critic that we will discuss shortly, Mr. Anderson has not made several dozen videos regarding this topic. He doesn't pretend to be an expert. He's just a lawyer who asks questions. And in his video, he explains what questions he asked me on January 11th and why he asked them. Next, we will hear from a YouTuber who goes by the name of Gutsick Gibbon, and we will hear her explain a little bit about her credentials.
But today I'm going to start off a little bit differently. I'm going to start off with my credentials. My name is Erica. I teach Introduction to Biological Anthropology at the honors level at my local state University. I got my BSA in pre-professional animal science. This is the pre-veterinary track back in 2019. And I also picked up minors in biology and one in anthropology. After that, I went to London and got my Master's of Research at the University of Roehampton in primate biology, behavior, and conservation. And I am currently a fourth-year PhD candidate in biological anthropology. I'm hoping to get my doctorate here in the next year or so. In my undergraduate career, I did fieldwork on civets in Thailand, and in my graduate career, I've done paleoanthropological fieldwork in Kenya on early Miocene hominoids. I've presented at the AABAs every year that I've been in graduate school, and I've spoken at several conferences outside of my academic life.
Okay, so Erica, who goes by Gutsick Gibbon, is about to get her PhD. She's studying primates and other things. So because she's so, well, shall I say, educated, perhaps instead of calling her Gutsick Gibbon, maybe we should call her Dr. Gibbon. It would be entertaining if somebody who has a PhD would just say, make a mistake. Now, you say, is that not fair? This woman doesn't have her PhD yet. She isn't even a doctor yet. Yeah, but she's almost there. About a year left to go. Practically has her PhD, so why not just act as if she has one? There really isn't much difference between a month before a person gets their degree and then the month after. There's not really much change that goes on, so you can kind of treat them as if they have a degree, even though they don't really have one. Now, after I recorded this, Gutsick Gibbon appeared on an atheist talk show called Skep Talk and said this.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Line and Skep Talk. My name is Aaron. I'll be trying to drive the boat this evening, and of course, hosting with me here is Erica, aka Gutsick Gibbon, aka almost Dr. Gibbon.
We're getting so close. I'm in the dissertation writing stage now while simultaneously applying for grants. And if they're approved, I will have to expand and prolong. And if they're not, then I'm just gonna cut and run and shoot for a December graduation, or maybe even if I'm really lucky, spring. But I think that's very optimistic.
What a gift to catch this live. Now, because she said this, Erica can't even complain that I am mocking her by calling her Dr. Gibbon. So, at the end of my presentation on January 11th, the different participants came away with very different opinions of what I meant. I am now going to replay the reactions, starting with Dr. Gibbon's analysis of what she thinks I meant on January 11th.
So, David will be setting the foundation for an open mic discussion by giving a comprehensive presentation on the solution to the apparent heat problems.
Okay, got it. The solution to the heat problem, right? The whole thing, right?
David, the floor is yours, brother.
Okay, so the title of the first part of the presentation I'm doing tonight is the solution to the heat problem for the Genesis flood as a result of CPT, that's catastrophic plate tectonics, using proof by contradiction.
Immediately after he says this, Andrew Combing in the chat says, as a result of CPT, this doesn't look all-encompassing so far.
I would assume everybody's watching this knows this, but the heat problem as it's been described is that most models of catastrophic plate tectonics require that large amounts of hot crustal material would be spread across the ocean floor during the flood, especially the Atlantic Ocean. This would release so much heat as to possibly boil the oceans. Because of this problem, the Genesis flood didn't happen. Thus, the Bible is wrong and evolution is right.
Wow. No. First of all, again, that tail end is quite telling, right? Thus, the Bible is wrong and evolution is right. What an interesting way of framing things. I wonder what perspective David is coming from. But also, the heat problem is typically utilized to, refer to all of the heat problems, right? Collectively, depending, usually it's couched, within whatever model it is we're talking about, but it's still all of the heat problems within it. That's, the heat problem with the flood. But even if you want to take away things like accelerated nuclear decay and impact events, things of that nature, CPT, or catastrophic plate tectonics, has a primary heat problem to it, and it's actually the friction of the continental plates atop the mantle, not seafloor spreading.
When you analyze all the different ways that you can deal with all this heat that supposedly was deposited during the flood, we've got only 5 different ways we can deal with this.
Now, remember, he's only dealing with the heat associated with his particular subject, right? He's not touching things like friction or impact events or limestone or accelerated nuclear decay. At least not yet. He's just talking about his thing.
So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to repeat what she just said, and I'm going to play that last clip again, and I'm going to discuss it.
Wow. No. First of all, again, that tail end is quite telling, right? Thus, the Bible is wrong and evolution is right. What an interesting way of framing things. I wonder what perspective David is coming from.
The statement that because of this problem, the Bible is wrong and evolution is right is what Dr. Gibbon has been claiming for years. So I find it surprising anyways that she doesn't at least agree to my definition of the problem. She could state that she doesn't disagree with the Bible, just the young earth creationist interpretation of the Bible, but she doesn't do that here.
But also, the heat problem is typically utilized to, refer to all of the heat problems, right? Like, collectively, depending, usually it's couched, within whatever model it is we're talking about, but it's still all of the heat problems within it. That's, the heat problem with the flood.
Yes, that is correct. It's all of them, and that's what I was discussing.
But even if you want to take away things like accelerated nuclear decay and impact events, things of that nature, CPT, or catastrophic plate tectonics, has a primary heat problem to it, and it's actually the friction of the continental plates atop the mantle, not seafloor spreading.
No, that's not correct. CPT is all, and I mean all of the heat problems. I mean, there are other ones, but they're generally minor. See, the problem we have here is that she has a fictitious list of heat problems. The vast majority of her list of problems they just simply don't exist, or if they do, they're negligible.
Now, remember, he's only dealing with the heat associated with his particular subject, right? He's not touching things like friction or impact events or limestone or accelerated nuclear decay. At least not yet. He's just talking about his thing.
Yeah, because CPT heat is the only one we need to worry about. We don't need to worry about all those other ones because they're either fictional, negligible, or minor. Or in the case of accelerated nuclear decay, I don't even believe that happens, so why would I worry about it? And so here's kind of the discrepancy here. Dr. Gibbon believes that I haven't resolved the issue because I've only talked about one source of heat. There are all these other heat sources. Whereas she's wrong because most of those sources are fictitious. However, today I'm not going to focus on that. I'm only focusing on one issue. I'm not focusing on the fact that her sources of heat are fictitious. I'm just focusing on the one issue that really makes this whole discussion that we're having about whether or not I have properly accounted for all the heat sources, it makes that whole discussion moot. You'll see why as this video progresses. For the purposes of this video, this means that we can assume that her heat sources are valid, even though they are actually mostly invalid. Now, let's hear the clip from the video that Mr. Anderson posted on his own channel.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't say... Go ahead, Mr. Go ahead, Dave. I didn't mean to...
Okay.
I don't think I was talking.
I continue your point because I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay, we can start with you, Mr. Anderson. If
Thank you very much.
Another question.
No, don't worry about it, Donny. My question was this. So, it 10 to the 29, which was the estimate from AIG as to how much heat is created just from catastrophic plate tech, just from the basaltic, the seafloor spreading, that would boil the oceans about 100 times over, right? If it was done all at once.
If you can find a way to explain how that heat gets into the ocean across the seafloor, yes.
So now I haven't watched his presentation and I don't know what he's talking about. And I mean, this is a good moment for him, right? Because that does sound like a responsive, answer. And like it's new information to me, right? So I'm kind of rocked on my heels here. So you can see what I do is I take a moment to think and I kind of reset, and we go out, we go kind of, basically we do what I call going around again, so we can get to the point that I want to talk about. And while that's happening, I'm kind of trying to digest what he said so that I can kind of understand it, and I can make sure that that I attack it in the right way. So I'm kind of doing two things at once here. So you'll see sort of I kind of stop, I reset, I go around to try and make the point that I want to make and lead him down the path that I want. And at the same time, I'm trying to figure out, like, what is he talking about? What is this thing that he just said?
What do you mean by, oh?
Yeah, because I talked about heat transfer. And I'm saying that it's very hard to get that heat across the seafloor into the oceans. That's kind of my whole point.
So you said that they can handle about 10 to the 27 joules without the ocean getting 15 degrees hotter. Sorry, I see where I've gone wrong now. You're saying, look, I can dissipate about 10 to the 27 joules worth of heat over a couple of hundred years in a way that's not going to kill everything in the ocean, because you can't get too hot in the ocean. Never mind boiling it. You can't get too hot or all the fish will die. Is that right?
Well, you can't even cause heat stroke to the people that live on land. I mean, you have too much global warming and you get a heat wave and everybody dies.
Okay. But the point is that 10 to the 27 over that period of time you're talking about is the maximum that your model can handle, right?
Give or take, yeah. And climate modeling will give us a more exact number. Correct.
Okay. And according to AIG, the estimate of the amount of heat that you need to dissipate just for the CPT stuff is about 100 times that, right?
That's what Walker says, and the CPT model needs to be revised because that's not going to work.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you solved about 1% of the heat problem if we take AIG's numbers.
Yeah, or another way of saying it is, yeah, I mean, I suppose you could look at it that way.
And so there you can see the power of just sort of going around again. So the first time he kind of tried to take me down, or he did take me down this kind of side path, and I was like, what are you talking about with the heat transfer and stuff, right? Because the heat transfer thing, like, we're going to get into it some more, and once I understand it, it's not really it's not a defeater to the point. But then when we just simply go around again, when we start with the same basics and we establish them, and then we move forward and we go, look, so you can dissipate this amount, you need to dissipate about 100 times that amount, so you're able to dissipate 1%, right? And when he has a second look at it, he goes, yeah, I guess that's basically right. And I mean, that's the admission I'm looking for, because, like, what that means then is that you haven't solved the heat problem, right? You've solved 1% of the heat problem. So, game, set, right?
So anyways, now we've heard from the critics and we've learned a little bit about the critics. So then the question is, what am I going to talk about today? Critics have released a lot of videos complaining about my work, complaining my presentation didn't solve the issues at hand. They've raised a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions in the live chat that weren't addressed. Am I going to answer all of them today? No, I'm not. I'm only going to focus on one issue. Why? Well, there's a lot to talk about here. And this video would be a long video. And I figure I would talk about the most important issue. So Mr. Anderson's analysis of my presentation is, number one, I didn't solve any problem, even if we just look at CPT heat, because I can't deal with the numbers that Walker has given for the amount of energy that's going to be released in CPT heat. That's his first thing. The second thing that Mr. Anderson says is that heat transfer isn't important. Now, I'm not going to discuss why Walker's numbers are wrong today. Of course I'm going to discuss that, but another video, some other time, not today. we're going to just focus on the second issue, which is that heat transfer isn't important. Do you have anything else to say, Dr. Gibbon?
And so with the entire history of my interactions with Donny and Raw Matt out of the way, we're going to work through this entire 4-hour monstrosity. Not, mind you, because it's chock full of brand new material and new arguments. In fact, whenever they make a repeated claim that I've already addressed in a deep dive, I'm just going to take a clip from that deep dive and stick it in there, just so you can really appreciate how the Standing for Truth channel uses strategies of obfuscation to make it seem like there's actually a dialogue going on and that they're actually responding in good faith. The primary means by which the Standing for Truth channel maintains a false pretense of good faith dialogue is by utilizing a strategy that I'm calling the Donny Deals fallacy. This is an argument style that works something like this. I'll present an issue. The heat problem, for example. And Donny will respond with, the heat problem isn't an issue for young Earth creationism because of A. I will look at that and create a 2-hour deep dive video where I say, nope, it's still a problem because of B. A does not work because of B. And then Donny will respond in turn with another very long midnight stream that says, but Gutsick Gibbon, have you considered A? So he's just reasserting the first point and not addressing the critique of that initial point. The second strategy is taking all those Donny Deals fallacies and tucking them into 4-hour midnight streams that they know no one will ever watch. Now, I realize that I too make very long videos, but mine are edited and fun.
So let's explain what's going on here. So she says in a Donny Deals fallacy, Donny says A, she responds to A, then brings up B, and in response, Donny says, have you considered A? So this is not what's going on here. What's going on here is I said A, you didn't respond to A. Instead, you argued B. So what I am doing today is I am pointing out that you did not address A. I'm not responding to B. Meaning I am not responding to many of the criticisms and comments and claims you made in your videos. I'm not responding to that. That would be B. I'm just pointing out the fact that you didn't address my main point in my video. I will respond to all your claims and all your assertions another day, in another video, not now. Now, let's hear from a creationist who calls himself T-Rock.
T-Rock is next on the panel. T-Rock, good to have you here as well, my brother. Firstly, how you doing? Brief intro. And did you have any thoughts or questions, even clarifying questions based on David's work here on the heat problem?
Good evening, gentlemen. Nice to make your acquaintance, David. I personally was completely unfamiliar with your name before this program was created by Donny. So I don't know anything about your work, or you know how there are certain issues in young Earth creation community that we have differences between ourselves on. So I don't honestly know where you are in any of that. Having said that, I'm a young Earth creationist. I've appeared multiple times on Donny's channel to do debates against evolutionists on a variety of topics. And
this is what Dr. Gibbon had to say about T-Rock.
T-Rock shows up and kind of just sits down there like a lithified piece of limestone, which is funny because you'll remember him from the limestone conversation.
So, let's hear what that useless piece of limestone called T-Rock has to say about my presentation. Keep in mind, he just said that he knew nothing about my work prior to my presentation a few hours ago. This is in contrast to Dr. Gibbon, who admits that she had read both of my abstracts prior to my presentation on January 11th.
Do you mind if I render an opinion real quick on that very thing that she's bringing up? So she's talking about magma and basalts, and she had this number 10 to the 27 joules, I guess is what she was saying. But anyway, to me, it's a completely bogus mathematical argument, and I'll tell you why. And so is the biomass argument. It's completely bogus math anyway. Because if you have a lump of magma, I think what they're doing is taking the volumetric estimation for the total amount of magma, and they're saying it's got this much heat in its hottest form in the mantle or below the crust, and today it's cold or room temperature, however you want to say, whatever its cooled off temperature is, and they're basically just doing the math on that much heat. And the reason I'm saying it's a completely bogus mathematical analysis is because both magma and biomass probably stayed hot for hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond the flood, so the heat was not dissipated instantly. So they're trying to dump it all into the flood year, when in reality it should have been distributed across hundreds or thousands of years.
In response to this, Dr. Gibbon typed the following comment into the live chat. That is a violation of extremely basic laws, T-Rock. What Dr. Gibbon didn't understand is that T-Rock was effectively paraphrasing what I had said earlier. If she disagreed with that statement, she should have attacked me, not T-Rock. An hour later, T-Rock would explain the same concept again, but in a different way. Let's see what he said an hour later.
So, pardon, not actually a question. I just want to reinforce what David's already said and give you kind of a real world example that almost everybody can identify with. If you take something like an egg or a cake, for example, if you turn your oven up to 500 degrees and you put a cake pan with batter in it into the oven at 500 degrees, anybody who's ever baked a cake knows that 500 degrees is way too hot to make a cake, right? It should usually done somewhere around 375 or 400. But the point is, what happens is you burn the bottom of the cake batter where it's contacting the pan, but the inside of the cake practically stays raw. And the reason is because you've actually created an insulation barrier in that burnt crust, and now the heat cannot transfer properly. And this is very similar to what you would get when you get sudden exposure of mantle material to the ocean. You're going to have a brief period of time where, yes, you're going to boil the water, but what's going to happen is you're probably going to start developing a crust over that mantle very thin, and over time it'll grow, but all you're doing over time is increasing the insulation barrier between it. Now the heat is trapped inside the mantle and comes out much more slowly.
That's a very good explanation. I think I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like when I cook fish sticks and they're burnt on the outside, but they're still frozen on the inside, so it balances out.
Yes.
Okay.
In August, Donny Budinsky asked Dr. Jason Lyle a question based on his understanding of what I had said on January 11th. Let's listen to the question he asked Dr. Lyle.
Sam, before you go, I wanted to make one point because I really like your hypothesis on the core. I think that's really good, and I think there's a good research project there, really. And so we don't necessarily know the temperature of the core at it could have been icicle, I don't know. And so a lot of that energy and heat could have gone to the core, and now the core, we understand, is extremely hot today because of that. So I'm curious, how would that heat be transferred to the core? Would that be like a supernatural transferring by God, or is there something going on scientifically?
So Donny Budinsky believes that the Earth's core has sufficient heat capacity to absorb all of the heat that can be generated by the Genesis flood. However, he is also of the opinion that in order for that to happen, there must be a viable heat transfer mechanism. But before I explain why Donny and T-Rock are correct, specifically that heat transfer is important, I first need to explain what proof by contradiction is. I bring this up, the proof by contradiction, because during my January 11th presentation, I said that I was solving the heat problems using proof by contradiction, and there was confusion as to what I meant by proof by contradiction. I'm going to show you an example of something that is similar to this, similar to proof by contradiction. In a debate with Kent Hovind on October 13th, 2023, Mr. Anderson lied. Keep in mind he is lying, and he said this.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I might almost be convincing myself. I mean, you know, like, so in scientific terms, to evolutionists, you know what? I'm going to change sides. I'm on your side now, Dr. Hovind. You know what? In scientific terms, evolutionists, if you would expect to see mutations where a multicellular part of the cell gets switched off, the cell reverts back to doing what it would otherwise. You know, your theory would predict that, but we don't see that, right, Dr. Hovind?
Well, not only do we don't see it, that's going backwards. Show me that the title of the debate is "Where's an example of something producing other than its kind?" You've given me fairy tale stories for an hour and 20 minutes.
I know. Look, I'm on your team now.
Like, you are, yeah.
Oh,
I believe that.
yeah. No, I'm switch sides.
I believe you. Yeah.
Right.
So, Mr. Anderson is lying when he says, "I am on your side." He is not on Ken Hovin's side. He is trying to attack Ken's position. What we are doing is basically proof by contradiction. Except in proof by contradiction, we are not lying like Mr. Anderson is doing. We are telling you upfront exactly what we are doing. Proof by contradiction is very common in mathematics, by the way. It is similar to the concept of steel manning your opponent's argument during a debate. If my explanation here still isn't satisfactory, you can Google proof by contradiction, and it is easy to see several examples of what that is. Anyhow, now let's switch sides, as Mr. Anderson said he was doing to Kent Hovind, and try to help evolutionists boil the oceans so we can disprove the Genesis flood. So how would we boil the oceans in only 1 year? However, we have a problem here, and that is exactly what do we mean by boil the oceans? To demonstrate this issue, I will now play a clip from Mr. Anderson's video.
So 10 to the 26 will boil the oceans. Is that fair?
If it's deposited instantaneously, it will increase the temperature to 100 degrees centigrade. It wouldn't boil it for reasons I'm not going to get into, but it would increase it by 100 degrees centigrade. So it would increase it to the temperature that water boils at atmospheric pressure.
So he's actually right about this because I was curious and I looked it up. And the reason is that, remember that the boiling point of water depends on the pressure. And so you could actually get water at the bottom of the ocean to probably quite a bit hotter than 100 degrees Celsius before that part of the ocean started to boil, because it won't turn into a gas because it's being squished together by the weight of all the water above it. So that part of the ocean actually probably could get hotter, but I mean, it doesn't really matter because it would still kill everything in the ocean. So I think, look, 100 degrees Celsius is gonna do it anyways.
So I have several things to say about this. First of all, that was a smart idea, Mr. Anderson, to actually check me and see if what I was saying was correct. My feeling is, my suspicion is, that he probably didn't believe what I had to say, and he was probably going to point that out, what I said was wrong, and decided to double check it first. Good thing, Mr. Anderson, you did that, because if you had said I was wrong, I would have definitely pointed out how, no, I was right and you were actually wrong. So smart of him to do that, to actually, if he thinks that I'm saying something wrong, for him to actually check that first. That's the first thing I want to say. So leaning on to the whole issue of pressure affecting how the oceans boil, actually, if we really want to get technical here, and I want to make a issue on a technicality, it's actually impossible to boil the oceans because the critical pressure of water is 22 megapascals, and 22 megapascals corresponds to a depth of 2,200 meters, and much of the ocean water is below 2,200 meters, and so that means a significant fraction of the oceans is actually greater than its critical pressure. It will not boil. Anytime a liquid's above its critical pressure, there is no difference between liquid and vapor. It will transition from a liquid-like state to a gas-like state as the temperature increases, but it doesn't boil. So anyhow, you technically, if we want to be technical here, you can't actually boil the oceans because most of it is, or not most of it, a significant portion of it is above the critical pressure, and so it won't boil. So that leaves us with a little definitions problem here. Issue here being is, okay, you say boil the oceans, what pressure are we talking about? See, if you were to heat up the oceans to above its critical temperature, which is the temperature at the critical point, where it transitions from being subcritical to supercritical, if you were to heat it up to its critical temperature, the upper portions of the ocean would be vaporized. Well, whatever we want, however we want to define that. And then the lower portions would be at that temperature, like I say, where there's no difference between gas and liquid. So you really can't necessarily boil the oceans because, see, the atmosphere, it doesn't have the capacity to absorb all the water from the oceans without increasing its pressure also. So if you were to increase the temperature of the oceans to the critical point, the atmospheric pressure would increase because the oceans are so much more massive than the atmosphere, and the pressure of the oceans or atmosphere would be one and the same anyways, would be determined by the ocean because the ocean has 300 times the mass of the atmosphere. So to say boil the oceans really doesn't, there really isn't a definition for that. However, I don't want to sit here and argue over definitions here. I've noticed, for example, speaking of arguing over definitions, Dr. Gibbon will post a video saying that humans and chimps are 99% identical, the DNA anyways. And then a creationist will post a video saying that humans and chimps are 85% identical, the DNA anyways. And then they'll go back and forth on this. And they'll post one, the evolutionists will post an hour video, and then the creationists will point another hour video. And if you actually listen to what they're saying and you come down to it, this is really petty, because both people agree on the facts. They're just disagreeing on the definitions. What's considered 99% similar? What definition do you use? What definition do you use to come with the 85% similar? And so the creationists don't like the evolutionist definition, and the evolutionists don't like the creationist definition, and it's a big, huge argument over definitions. And I don't really want to get into that. I want to get into the facts of the matter here. So how are the evolutionists defining boil the oceans? Maybe we can use their definition.
For the record, to boil the oceans, you need 5.6 times 10 raised 26 joules of energy, and to vaporize it completely, you need 3.7 times 10 raised 27 joules.
Okay, so even though Dr. Gibbon is wrong here, I'm going to ignore that fact. Even though if you were to increase the temperature of the oceans to 100 degrees Celsius, all you're going to do is double the atmospheric pressure, because the top 15 meters of the ocean will boil away and the rest of it will remain liquid. And once the atmospheric pressure increases, that means that the boiling temperature also increases. And that happens, as, by the way, as you continue to increase the temperature of the ocean, the pressure increases because all the water is evaporating going into the atmosphere, which means the boiling temperature increases until you reach the critical point, as I previously discussed. So she's wrong here, because if you heated the oceans to 100 degrees Celsius, it's not going to boil the oceans because the boiling temperature is increased. But we're going to use her definition anyways. So the definition I'm going to use is, if they can demonstrate that the oceans have been heated to 100 degrees Celsius, we'll just say that they boiled the oceans. For the purposes of this video, that counts. The first thing I would like to do in order to demonstrate how to boil the oceans is that I need to revisit what I feel was my most important slide in my presentation in January 11th. Okay, so this slide I feel is the most important slide here. And however, there's nothing on this slide that's actually wrong, but I realized that the slide could have been labeled differently so that people understood what I was trying to say. So I'm going to show you how I should have worded the slide here. Okay, so there's a difference here. With the previous slide, I said there's only 5 options to deal with the heat, and now I'm saying there's only 5 places for the heat to go. One of these 5, and we'll talk about number 6 in a minute. But anyways, the reason why the difference here is what I'm not saying that there's only 5 ways only 5 ways to get rid of this heat. Maybe somebody can think of a 6th or a 7th one. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that every single creationist attempt to get rid of the heat, from catastrophic plate tectonics, cellular nuclear decay, Gutsick Gibbon's fictitious list of heat problems, whatever you want to call them, whatever heat source exists, all of them can be reclassified as one of these 5. So what we're doing here See, the whole point of this is to deal with a lot of creationist solutions that don't work. And by all I'm doing here is I'm labeling things. I'll give you an example. Really a good one would be the hypercane idea. So with the hypercane idea, you have supposedly all these hypercanes are pulling up all this energy and they get rid of it. Well, where's the energy going to? Is it due to the evaporation of water? Then that's 1B. What are you saying? I'm talking to the creationists that say hypercanes got rid of the heat. Maybe the water evaporates and then recondenses into the atmosphere, and you're dumping all that heat into the atmosphere. That would be option 2. That's different than option 1B. You're transferring the heat to another thermal reservoir. In this case, you're transferring to the atmosphere. What are you proposing? Are you proposing that the hypercanes pull the energy up from the ocean as it evaporates and then recondenses into the upper atmosphere and then irradiates to outer space? Then that's option 3. So all these except for option number 5 obey the second law of thermodynamics. Or I don't know, maybe it's the first one. I forget the numbers. Anyways, it's conservation of energy. All these, except for number 5, obey conservation of energy. And so what I'm doing here with the slide here is to force somebody who, say, proposes the hypercanes model is to reclassify it into one of these 3 phases and one of these 3 possibilities, so we can actually know what's happening to the energy. Because if you just say hypercanes take the energy up, I don't know where you're proposing it does. And so what I end up having to do, because they won't usually tell me what they're doing with their energy and where it's going to, I end up having to figure out which one of these 3 it goes to. In the case of hypercanes, I can show you that those are the only 3 possibilities in their hypercane model, and that none of them work. So hypercanes, depending upon what you're proposing, you're either proposing that the heat goes to a phase change, evaporation of water, transfers to the atmosphere if it recondenses in the atmosphere, or radiated out of space. It's either 1B, 2, or 3, depending upon what you're proposing. Usually they don't give us details. So what about, let's say you say the heat goes to the formation of coal. That's either 1A or 2. Why is it 1A or 2? Well, if all this heat's going into the ground and it's being absorbed by the coal, then maybe there's some chemical reaction that absorbs heat. And then if that's what you're proposing, then you'd be proposing 1A, that the chemical reaction is where the heat is going to. Or if you're saying, well, the coal in the surrounding rock heats up because, it just gets hotter because all this heat goes down there, then that's 2, transferring to another thermal reservoir. In this case, it's going to the coal in the ground nearby. So, you're telling me that all this energy goes into coal formation. Which one is it, 1A or 2? Again, whether or not that's feasible is next, after we figure out where you're transferring the heat. One other thing I should say. I mentioned this number 6, and you notice this number 6 is not on the other slide. Well, what happened was Gutsick Gibbon, she made a comment that I originally when I first saw it, I was offended at it. Because I'm like, it's obviously that, if we're talking about getting rid of the heat, it's obvious the heat was generated. And then I thought about it some more. I'm like, wait a second, she has a point. Maybe it isn't obvious that these 5 ideas assume that the heat was actually generated in the first place. I mean, it apparently seems to be self-evident. But number 6 is a viable method. If somebody says, such and such process generates heat, is to just argue the heat was never generated. I mean, that completely solves the problem. So, I mean, you're not saying where the heat goes. So the title is still correct, 5 places for the heat to go, because under 6, you don't have any heat to go anywhere. So I like this title. I'm not changing it to 6 places for heat to go, even though I got 6 items on my list. But arguing that the heat that was never generated, yes, is definitely a viable option here. If accelerated nuclear decay didn't happen, you don't have any accelerated nuclear decay heat to deal with, for example. If asteroid impacts didn't happen, then you don't have any asteroid impact heat to deal with. If catastrophic plate tectonics didn't happen, then you don't have any CPT heat to deal with. So, it depends on what you're proposing happened. Anyways, that's like I said, that's number 6. But so what I was going to talk to is Z-pinch. Z-pinch could be either 5B or it could be our option 6. Why do I say it could be option 5B or 6? Well, what are you proposing with Z-pinch? Z-pinch, the idea with Z-pinch here is that there are these nuclear reactions that happen that are creating all these heavy elements. Well, some people might say that, because it takes more energy to create these elements than, you get out of them, so that takes energy, and so that's an absorption of energy to create Z-pinch. Now, Z-pinch doesn't work, but that's not that's neither here nor there. Again, so if Z pinch is absorbing all this energy, it'd be 5B because it'd be new physics. It'd be a new nuclear process that we don't really have much knowledge of. But you could also use Z pinch to argue that accelerated nuclear decay didn't happen because Z pinch supposedly creates all these different isotopes, and that's why the rocks look old when they're really not, because of Z pinch. And so then that would be option 6. So, you know, if you say Z pinch solves the heat problem for accelerated nuclear decay, well, which one are you arguing, 5B or 6? Hydroplate theory is option 1C. So in hydroplate theory, we're saying that all this energy is converted into this thermal energy, whatever it's converted into mechanical energy. It has so much energy, it leaves the Earth and never comes back. It's basically the opposite of a asteroid impact. So that's the idea with hydroplate, is all the energy is turned into a mechanical process. You're shooting up all the stuff there, and it sails away, not sails away, it flies away, never comes back. None of this slide has anything to do with whether or not it works. It's just trying to classify it's trying to get at what you're trying to do and where you're saying the energies go for, so that we can then figure out if it works or not. Like I say, the purpose of this slide is not to evaluate whether a proposed solution to any heat problem is feasible. That's just to classify it and figure out where the heat's going, so we can determine whether that said method is feasible. I want to talk about the basics of thermodynamics because for those people that maybe need, just so everybody's clear here. All right, so this doesn't necessarily apply to my model or what I'm talking today. This is just kind of more of an introductory thing for those that maybe don't really understand thermodynamics very well. Okay, so we're going to talk about English units first, and we're going to talk about metric units later. I'm going to start with English units, since people are more familiar with that. Heat energy is measured in British thermal units, or they call them BTUs. The definition of a BTU is 1 BTU will heat 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. Mechanical energy, that's lifting stuff or moving items, is measured in foot-pounds. 1 foot-pound is enough energy to lift the weight of 1 pound by a distance of 1 foot. Now, you can convert mechanical energy into heat energy. Those are interchangeable. 1 British thermal unit is equivalent to 778.17 foot-pounds. So if you have like a lot of friction going on and you have all this mechanical energy and your friction gets dissipated as heat, that's how you convert mechanical energy into heat. And for every 778.17 foot-pounds of mechanical energy that would be dissipated, you'd be given off 1 BTU. But the energy is the same. It's just a different form, mechanical versus heat energy. Now, power is different. They're not the same. Power in English units is measured in horsepower or BTUs per hour. 1 horsepower is defined as 550 foot-pounds per second. That was when they were coming up with this. This is, I think his name was James Watt, was the guy that came up with the term horsepower, and he was selling engines, and he wanted to let farmers know, what would it be equivalent to a horse. So that's what a horsepower is, and a BTU per hour, if you're talking about like a heat load of something that's, maybe an air conditioner, how much heat it puts out, or a heating unit, or a fireplace, or a boiler, whatever, and you want to do this, you have you do British thermal units per hour, and you can convert between the mechanical power and thermal power between the two, and there's the conversion. Heat flux. Now, that's how much heat is going through a given area. So if you're putting a BTU per hour over 2 square foot, that is half the heat flux if it's concentrated in just 1 square foot, okay? And it's measured in BTUs per hour per square foot. That's just how much how much heat flux goes through a given area. Okay, so now we're going to move on to metric units. In metric units, heat energy is measured in calories. 1 calorie will heat 1 gram of water by 1 degree centigrade. Calories on food nutrition label are actually kilocalories. So if you buy some food and it says it has 400 calories, and it's actually 400,000 calories. But anyways, but anyhow, that's the way it's defined, is the amount of energy. Mechanical energy is measured in joules. Metric is different than English in that kilograms are a unit of mass, whereas in English units, pound is a unit of force, And so a newton is the amount of force that's generated when you accelerate a kilogram by 1 meter per second per second. So at Earth's gravitational field, it's a little under 10 meters per second per second. So a kilogram has a weight of approximately 10 newtons. So 1 newton is about 1/10 of a kilogram, as far as that's on Earth's gravity at rest. So 1 joule is defined as enough energy to lift a weight of 1 newton by a distance of 1 meter. A calorie is exactly equal to 4.186 joules. So 4.186 joules will heat 1 gram of water by 1 degree centigrade. And so a lot of times when we use heat energy, we will refer to joules and not calories. Whereas in English units, you're not going to be using foot pounds. You're going to normally going to use British thermal units. Explosive energy is measured in TNT equivalent. That's trinitrotoluene. Tons of TNT, kilotons, megatons, etc. So by definition, that is 1,000 calories per gram of TNT. So it's equivalent to heating the same amount of water by 1,000 degrees Celsius. So a gram of water needs 1 calorie to raise it by 1 degree centigrade. It's 1,000 calories to raise it by 1,000 degrees centigrade, ignoring the effects of it boiling away, and there's extra heat involved in that. But ignoring that, 1 gram of TNT would be equal to 1,000 calories, or 4,186 joules. So a megaton TNT would be 1,000,000 tons of water by 1,000 degrees centigrade, or 1 billion with a B tons of water by 1 degree centigrade. Well, a metric ton is approximately 1 cubic meter, and so 1 billion cubic meters is 1 cubic kilometer. So 1 megaton of TNT would heat 1 cubic kilometer by 1 degree centigrade. So why do we use TNT equivalent? For the military, really. You don't really want to say that this bomb. It's easier to say that this bomb has 1 megaton of TNT equivalent than it can heat cubic kilometer of water by 1 degree centigrade, or say that it has 4.186 times 10 to the 15 joules. Generals aren't really going to think like that. TNT is a common explosive. Most chemical explosives have similar, within an order of magnitude, power to TNT. So when they make nuclear bombs, they just use TNT equivalent. But it's another unit of energy. It's like mechanical energy and heat energy. And then when we go on to power, of course, it's different. Power, of course, as in with the English units, is energy per unit time. So 1 watt is defined as a joule per second. Now, remember when we talked before, horsepower is 550 foot-pounds per second. And here, a watt is just 1 joule per second. So if you have a power of 1 watt and something gives off a power of 1 watt for 10 seconds, it'll give a total of 10 joules. So you cannot convert watts into joules without knowing how much time elapsed. That's an important distinction. And then heat flux is measured in watts per square meter. And you're going to hear me talk about watts per square meter a whole lot today, because I'm talking a lot about heat flux. Okay, next I'm going to talk about heat capacity. There are many different ways to measure heat capacity. I'm going to start with the thing I say at the bottom here. Units of heat energy are intentionally defined so that water has a value of 1. And you'll notice that in the previous one, a British thermal unit has to do with 1 pound of water. The calorie is 1 gram of water. And so the heat capacities of most of these substances are going to be measured. The heat capacity is going to be 1 in whatever unit typically. So heat capacity would be how many BTUs are needed to heat 1 pound by 1 degree Fahrenheit. You can have BTUs per cubic foot per degree Fahrenheit. Now, the problem with English unit is a pound of water weighs, I think it's 62.4 cubic. No, a cubic foot of water weighs 62.4 pounds. So with metric units, it's real simple. A liter of water weighs 1 kilogram. But in English, isn't that way. We can use calories per gram per degree centigrade. In that case, the water is 1. Joules per gram per degree centigrade. The value for water is 4.186. So there's 4.186 joules in a calorie. And if we use joules per cubic centimeter, that's because 1 cubic centimeter is 1 gram. That's the same. Water will be 1 for both. Sometimes, most of the time, if you look up heat capacity for units, you will find it as in joules per gram, or BTUs per pound, something like calories per gram. I prefer to use joules per cubic centimeter, because if I'm dealing with large amounts of material, especially the crust or test size of the earth, I don't necessarily know the density, and so I prefer just using joules per cubic centimeter when I pull up heat capacity. But anyways, megajoules per cubic meter per degree centigrade, that is exactly the same as joules per cubic centimeter per joules per cubic centimeter is the same as megajoules per cubic meter, because there's 1,000,000 cubic centimeters in a cubic meter. So the last two on that heat capacity are the same. So in order to determine the energy absorbed, we need to know three things. Okay, we need to know the amount of material, the heat capacity of the material. We need to know the amount of material that's heated, and we know the temperature change. If we know those three things, we can convert it. So joules per gram per degree centigrade, we know the temperature change. We multiply that by the temperature change. We know the amount of material heat in the mass. Then we have how many joules you get, because we know the heat if we know the heat capacity. And like I say, we can convert between per gram per cubic centimeter if we know the density of the material. And grams per cubic centimeter is one way to define that. Okay, so this is like an introductory, some of the introductions of thermodynamics, just in case anybody isn't aware of it. I figured it was important to say this. All right. So, what do we need to boil the oceans? 3 requirements. We have to have enough energy. That's number 1. I'm going to show that that's easy to meet in a second. There must be a process to transfer the heat into the oceans. That's going to be an issue, and we'll get to that in a minute. The required temperature must be attainable, including the delta T. That delta T just means temperature change for heat transfer. So that just means is the material you're transferring heat into the oceans has to be hotter than the temperature of the oceans, and if the temperatures are equivalent, you're not going to have any heat transfer. So there has to be an excess of temperature in the hot material that's being cooled to cool the oceans that are cold, and the higher the excess, the more heat's going to be transferred. So you not only need to exceed the temperature of the oceans, you actually have to have a required amount for the heat transfer. So the required temperature, if we were dealing with hot material from the crust, hot magma, hot seafloor material, it's obviously going to be greater than the temperature of the oceans, which is about 4 degrees Celsius. So item 3 is easy to meet. It's maybe an issue for other heat transfer mechanism, like if you're trying to dump heat into the mantle from the crust into the mantle, but we'll get to that later. So here's the thing. On number 1, I say heat currently in the mantle and core is 25,000 times needed to heat the ocean by 96 degrees centigrade. I say 96 because the oceans are currently at 4 degrees centigrade. Thus, there is plenty of capacity to release or absorb heat. Now, my source here, that's Walker's paper, his 2023 paper in the Answers Research Journal. He's just quoting a secular source. And he gives the residual stored heat in the mantle. Well, no, that's actually in the Earth. So that would include the core as 13.3 million yotajoules. That's 25,000 times the amount of heat necessary to heat the ocean. So, because there's 20, and again, this is according to secular sources, and it may not be correct. We don't really know what the temperature is the mantle if we believe in CPT, because we have different conditions than the secular community does. But that notwithstanding, but I'm just assuming that the secular sources are correct here. Walker's not saying that he agrees with this number, by the way. He's just saying that that's what has been reported. Anyhow, if we got 25,000 times the amount of energy needed to boil the ocean, that's actually as residual stored heat currently inside the Earth right now, there's easily enough energy to boil the oceans. There's also easily enough energy if some process would happen that would boil the oceans, where the mantle could absorb all that heat. I mean, if you can boil the oceans 10 times over, but instead dump that heat into the mantle, now it goes from 25,000 times the heat necessary to boil the oceans to 25,000 10 times. It's not much different. Either way, there is plenty of heat capacity to release heat in the mantle and to absorb heat into the mantle. However, as I say here, all this is irrelevant unless heat is transferred to or from the mantle or in the core. Okay, unless if the heat can't get into the mantle or can't get out of it, this is irrelevant. The other issue here is I say 4,000 meter depth gives a low surface area. This is not intuitive. People just assume that if you were to replace the seafloor with a bunch of hot magma, that it would just easily transfer into the oceans. And the math shows that no, it won't do that. And that's because the ocean water is so deep, and so it limits the amount of energy for the ability for heat transfer. In fact, I made a big deal about this on January 11th. It's not intuitive. You actually have to do the math to actually see that there actually is a heat transfer problem. We'll talk more about that later, though. Anyways, I did heat transfer calculations to get in order to boil the oceans. On my January 11th presentation, I did heat transfer calculations for all three methods: for hydrothermal flow, for conduction, for magma convection, and I discussed all of them. Okay, back to this slide again. We got 5 places for the heat to go. So let's just forget about the heat transfer problem for now. Let's just assume that we can make that work somehow. How much heat do we actually need to get into the oceans? Well, we're going to need to, if we dump a bunch of energy into the oceans, remember I said we have 5 different ways for the heat to go, and so we got to figure out what's going to happen to all this heat. So any heat that escapes the suboceanic crust and gets into the oceans, by definition, excludes number 4. Because with number 4, we're saying now that that heat stays in the suboceanic crust, but if it actually escapes the suboceanic crust, that any energy that escapes can't be classified in number 4. So we got 1 through 3 and 5. And obviously the heat, and the idea that the heat was never generated doesn't apply either. So that leaves 1 through 3. If we don't accept miracles or new physics, that leaves the numbers 1 through 3. So we need to calculate how much, if we were to dump enough heat, if we were to dump enough heat to increase the temperature of the oceans to 100 degrees Celsius, how much heat would be lost through on items 1 through 3. So I'm going to do that. All right. So if we were to dump enough heat into the oceans to raise its temperature to 100 degrees Celsius, we're going to have a lot of sources of heat removal. Evaporation of ocean water. I say that's method 1B or 2. Method 1B was a phase change. Method 2 is transfer to another reservoir. Well, what's going to happen is, we're going to have melting of the glaciers. 1B, okay, the reason why I say that's 1B or 2 is because it's a phase change. Water evaporates. It doesn't recondense as rain. You could say that energy is transferred to the atmosphere, or you can say it's a phase change. Either way, it's really how you want to define it, because you had liquid water, energy is lost, and now it's in the vapor form in the atmosphere. So that's where it went to. You classify it on either 1B or 2. Melting of the glaciers is 1B. That's a phase change. That's liquid changing to solid. Some heat is going to be removed from that process as well. The continents are going to heat up. That's method 2. That's transferred to another reservoir. The atmosphere itself is going to heat up. That is method 2, transfer to another reservoir. Okay, and then there's going to be extra radiation to space. That's method 3. And then number 6 is formation of coal and limestone, and I'm going to explain why that's inapplicable. And you say limestone? I thought limestone limestone formation gave off heat. No, it doesn't. Limestone formation actually absorbs heat, and I've looked into that. That's actually the lithification of limestone is an endothermic reaction, meaning it actually absorbs heat. Not very much, by the way, because there's not much limestone, but it actually is an endothermic reaction. So limestone could be a heat sink, but it won't. And we'll explain why. All right, so we'll go into these in more detail. Evaporation of the ocean water. So if you were to actually heat the oceans to 100 degrees Celsius, the upper 15 meters of water will permanently evaporate. The atmospheric pressure will double. And so we can actually do math on this, and we can figure out how much energy would it. The reason why I say the upper 15 meters is because roughly the oceans are going to be about 2/3 of the surface area of the Earth, and the atmospheric pressure is equivalent at sea level is equivalent to 10 meters of water, and so 15 meters. That's how much would permanently evaporate. Yes, some of that would recondense back as rain, but then more would evaporate And so you're going to have 15 meters of water that basically permanently evaporates, even though water constantly enters and leaves the atmosphere. And I've converted this into kilometers, 0.015 I've converted that into kilometers, and I've converted into billion. The total area of the ocean is 360 million square kilometers. I converted that into billion kilometers to get billion cubic kilometers, and then I just divide this by the total volume of the atmosphere, since I have that from memory, 1.335 billion, not the atmosphere, the total volume of the oceans. I have that from memory is 1.335 billion cubic kilometers. Multiply that by the 550 calories per gram. That's latent heat of vaporization. That's just basically saying how much energy needs to, how much energy you need to evaporate water, and we get the whole ocean's evaporation of the upper 15 meters of water that permanently evaporates will cool the oceans by 2.2 degrees Celsius. That's the calculation. Okay. Melting of the glaciers. The glaciers are about 2% of the ocean volume. We need about 200 degrees centigrade of equivalent temperature change needed. That's because the glaciers are below 0 degrees Celsius. The amount of energy it takes to get ice, to melt ice, from 0 degrees Celsius ice to 0 degrees Celsius liquid water is 80 calories per gram, or basically you could say the same energy to melt ice would increase the same amount of water temperature by 80 degrees Celsius. So you need 20 degrees to raise it to roughly, to raise all the glaciers in the world, in Antarctica, near the North Pole, etc., to bring them to their melting point roughly. Another 80 degrees to bring them to melt them, and then turn them from solid to liquid, and then another 100 degrees to bring it back to the temperature of the oceans. 2% times 200 degrees Celsius gives you about 4 degrees Celsius. You'll have that about 4 degrees Celsius for melting the glaciers. Okay, so this is additional heat you got to add into to heat your oceans to 100 degrees Celsius. The heating of the continents, you're going to have hot rainwater it'll flush out the rivers and lake water. As the hot rainwater is going to run off the ground in terms of rivers, it's going to be cooled by the ground. Also, the hot rainwater will soak into the ground. It'll flush out cold groundwater that's already will go into. I don't know how much this is, but given the heat capacity of the land, I don't think it's going to be much. Like I say, it's probably less than 1 degree Celsius. We're going to consider this 1 degree Celsius. So that's cooling from heating of the continents. Heating of the atmosphere. The atmosphere's heat capacity is 1,100 times less than the ocean, so you'll have to heat the atmosphere, and that's enough energy to cool the oceans by 1.1 degrees centigrade roughly. It's going to be ignored. Radiation for space. So the current amount of energy that's absorbed from the Earth by the sun and that radiates into outer space is 4 gigajoules. That's 4 times 10 to the 24 joules per year, and the current radiative temperature is 255 Kelvin. We're going to assume it increases to 355 Kelvin, and you still get your 4 gigajoules, and there's my calculation. You get 2 degrees Celsius. And then number 6 is formation of coal and limestone. This is deep underground, so any energy that's lost by formation of coal and limestone isn't going to be available since it's going to be underground. Okay, well, we've calculated all the different sources of heat removal using methods 1, 2, and 3. And we have evaporation of ocean water. That gives us 2 degrees of cooling. Melting of the glaciers gives us 4 degrees of cooling. Heating the continents, we'll say that gives us about 1 degree of cooling. Heating of the atmosphere, we're going to ignore that because it's only about a 1/10 of a degree of cooling. And radiation to space is another 2 degrees of cooling. And formation of coal and limestone, that's not applicable. Add all those totals and you get 9 degrees of cooling. So if we were to put enough energy into the oceans to raise the temperature of the oceans to 100 degrees Celsius, we have to account for the fact that the oceans are going to cool off by about 9 degrees Celsius over the period of 1 year. Okay, now here's the thing. The current ocean temperature is 4 degrees centigrade. So we need to increase the ocean temperatures by enough energy to warm them up by 105 degrees Celsius after this 9 degree cooling, plus the current ocean temperature 4 degrees. That 4 degrees, that's an average. That's from the equator to the North Pole. That's from the surface of the sea to the seafloor. So we need enough energy to raise it by 105 degrees Celsius to give a final temperature of 100 degrees Celsius after a year. Now, if we have more time than a year, then this calculation is going to be different. But we're doing this, we want to boil the oceans in 1 year. All right. So what heat flux do we need to boil the oceans in 1 year? We need 51,500 watts per square meter. The surface area of the ocean is 360 million square kilometers. The surface area of the continents is 150 million square kilometers. You add the total, you get 510 million square kilometers is the total surface area of the Earth. So if you were to, if you have a heat flux of 51,500 watts per square meter over the entire seafloor, and you do that for 31.55 million seconds, that's the number of seconds in a year, over the area of 360 million square kilometers. That's my calculation. That's how much energy you'd get. Now, you notice it's not exactly 105, it's 104.7. The reason I did this is every 500 watts per square meter increases by 1 degree centigrade. So I just rounded the nearest 500. So the conclusion here is if you can demonstrate a heat flux of 51,500 watts per square meter, we have really two options. We have option 5, or the oceans are boiling. Those are only two options, because we've already accounted for options 1, 2, and 3, where the heat can go, all the different places for it to go. As I said, 4 is not applicable here, and obviously we're not dealing with option number 6, because we're saying the heat was generated and it didn't stay in the seafloor. It went out into the ocean, so option 4 isn't applicable. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 aren't an option. The only way to cool the oceans would be option 5, and this is where the critics want to go to. They want to say that the only way you can cool the oceans would be if either through a miracle or miraculous cooling or new physics. And if they can demonstrate 51,500 watts per square meter, that's average. That's over the entire year. Okay, so if it's lower at the beginning of the year or higher at the end, or vice versa, that's the average. It has to be across the entire seafloor. So it could be 100,000 watts per square meter in one area and 0 in another area, and then intermediate. But you have to have an average. This heat flux for an entire year over the entire seafloor, and you will boil the oceans, unless we invoke option number 5, which is new physics or a miracle. Now, there's one other complication here, and that is some people believe that CPT only happened in the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is about 1/4 the size of the entire ocean. In this case, you need 4 times that heat flux. Okay, but there are some creationists that believe the entire seafloor was laid down during the flood. So for those, 51,500 watts per square meter suffices. Okay, so why in the world am I dealing with heat flux here? This doesn't really seem to make sense. We calculated the energy. It's 581.5 yattajoules, or 5.85 times 10 to the 26 joules. That's all we need. And to know that determine the time required, and you see what I highlighted in bold there, all we know is the heat transfer weight and the total energy transferred in joules. Yes. If you know that, let's say you're transferring 10 joules at a power of 1 watt, then it's 10 seconds. And so really, what I put in bold is correct. That's a true statement. We don't need to know the heat flux. You just need to know the rate at which the heat is transferred and the total amount of energy that's transferred to determine the time. So it would seem that what we're doing here by calculating heat flux instead of just power rate is we're dividing by the ocean surface area and then later multiplying back in. That just seems like it's unnecessary step. It seems like a bunch of unnecessary confusion just to make things more difficult on ourselves. So why am I doing this? There's a reason for this. Very simple. If you look at any equation that has to do with heat transfer, any mechanism of heat transfer, is always mentioned in watts per square meter. The reason is they don't know, who's ever determining the equations for heat transfer, they don't know the surface area for your scenario. So that's the value you need to put into the heat transfer equation. So I'll give you one example. Let's talk about radiation, black body radiation. So you have a hot surface and it's in a vacuum or it's in outer space and it's radiating everywhere. The bigger that object is, the bigger the surface area is, the more heat loss it gives. And so the area, the surface area, and if we're talking about a spacecraft that's being launched by NASA, we're talking about an asteroid, we're talking about an entire planet, regardless, the amount of heat that's going to be radiated, it depends on the surface area. If you double the surface area, you're going to double the amount of heat that's lost through radiation. And so the equation will be in terms of watts per square meter. You have to know that. You have to know the area, and you have to input it into the equation to get how much heat value. That's just the way the equations are written. That's just the way it is. So the reason I do this, change it to heat flux, is it allows me to immediately tell whether or not that heat flux is reasonable. If you tell me that, we need 10 to the 19 watts, well, I don't know how much surface area is involved. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of how to do this. This is Donny's Earth core model. So in Donny's core model, I say he doesn't say how much energy is transferred. I'll calculate for 1.4 times 10 to the 29 joules. Because if you look at his Earth core model document that he recently made and posted on his website, you'll notice that he actually has different energies. So I don't know which one he's using, but my calculations is for this specific one here. Okay, he doesn't give cross-sectional area either. Is it the entire Earth? Is it half the Earth? I don't know. So I'm gonna use the maximum possible, which is 510 million cubic kilometers. That's square kilometers. That's the entire surface area of the Earth. I'm also using a time of 1 year, and I use that to calculate the heat flux. You see, he doesn't give me an area. I just assume one anyways. He doesn't give me time, but assuming 1 year for the flood is pretty reasonable here. And so I come to this conclusion here. If Donny wants to transfer this amount of energy into the Earth's core or into the Earth's mantle in his Earth core model, he needs at least 8.7 million watts per square meter. And if he can do that, his mechanism works. If he can't, it doesn't work. And it's that simple. I'm always going to convert everything into watts per square meter because I personally think that this is a rather high heat flux. I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, for him to get 8.7 million watts per square meter. I think that's just unrealistic. But, maybe he can demonstrate it. Anyhow, so, given Donny's situation here, remember all I said is that you have to demonstrate 51,500 watts per square meter to boil the oceans. This is how you would calculate the heat flux from a moving fluid. So you do 1 through 3 to calculate the heat flux. You need to know items 1, 2, 3 to calculate the heat flux. Once you get that to determine the total heat transfer, you need to know 4 and 5. Well, so you got 5 things you need to do in order to calculate the heat flux. This is for a moving fluid, by the way. There are other methods of heat transfer that don't require these calculations. This is just an example here. So the most difficult one is the one I've been putting bold, and that's 2. And that's how fast is this fluid moving. Okay, I am now done with the whole switching sides thing, as Mr. Anderson calls it. I am now going to get to my point. So basically, what I just did is explain how to boil the oceans. The slide that you see on screen right now is my most important slide today. Really, that's all the critics need to deal with. Well, what's the problem, you ask? Here's the issue. The bottom line is that a heat flux of 51,500 watts per square meter across the seafloor for an entire year is simply not possible. At least not in the post-flood conditions proposed by catastrophic plate tectonics. Yes, that is my point. And this assumes that there's hot mantle material that is in direct contact with the cold ocean water. I'm talking about 1,000 degrees Celsius or hotter of hot mantle material, or former mantle material, not that's now the seafloor. I'm also ignoring the sediment layer on the seabed, because you have sediment on the bottom of the ocean. And that sediment layer would further insulate the ocean water from the fresh, hot mantle material beneath it. The bottom line is that a heat flux of 51,500 watts per square meter across the seafloor for an entire year is simply not possible. Thus, it is impossible to boil the oceans because there's no way to transfer this energy into the oceans quickly enough to boil it. It really doesn't matter how much heat is available or how much heat is generated. None of those matter. It's not going to get into the oceans. Period. End of discussion.